The crystal champagne flute slipped from Eleanor Vance's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor, as her eyes locked onto the silver locket around the waitress's neck. 50 years of buried grief erupted in a single strangled sob that silenced the entire five-star restaurant. The billionaire who never cried, who built an empire on ice-cold decisions, was suddenly drowning in tears. That locket. Her locket shouldn't exist. The daughter who wore it had been dead for decades, or so she'd been told. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment your city below. I'd love to see how far this tale reaches. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Bernardin's private dining room, casting geometric shadows across the pristine white tablecloth. Eleanor Vance sat rigid in her chair, her 73-year-old frame wrapped in a charcoal Chanel suit that cost more than most people's cars. Her fingers adorned with diamonds that caught the light like trapped stars drummed against the table in a rhythm that betrayed the calm mask she wore. "Mother, you're not listening," Julian said, his voice carrying that particular brand of exasperation reserved for conversations about money that wasn't moving fast enough. At 48, her son had inherited her sharp cheekbones and cold gray eyes, but none of the warmth she'd once possessed before life had frozen it out of her. "I heard every word," Eleanor replied, though her attention drifted to the young waitress approaching their table. Something about the girl's walk, purposeful yet graceful, stirred an echo in her chest. "You want to liquidate the Hartford properties to fund your Shanghai expansion. The answer remains no." The waitress moved closer, her simple black uniform, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding them. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes the color of autumn honey. When she leaned forward to refill Eleanor's water glass, the afternoon light caught something at her throat. Time stopped. Eleanor's breath hitched, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The locket, a silver starburst with a small sapphire at its center, swayed gently against the girl's chest. It was impossible. That locket had been buried with her daughter 50 years ago. She'd placed it in the tiny casket herself, her tears falling like rain on the white satin lining. "Mother?" Julian's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mother, what's wrong?" But Eleanor couldn't answer. She was 19 again, standing in her father's study while he raged about family honor and bloodlines. She was 20, signing papers she didn't want to sign while her newborn daughter cried in a stranger's arms. She was 23, identifying a body they claimed was her child, placing the locket she'd worn during labor around the small, still neck. "Your locket," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. The words felt like shards of glass in her throat. The waitress, her name tag read Amelia, looked down in confusion, her hand instinctively moving to touch the silver starburst. "I'm sorry. Is everything all right with your meal? Where did you get it?" The question came out harder than Eleanor intended, decades of practiced authority bleeding through her shock. Amelia took a step back, her honey eyes widening with something between confusion and alarm. "It's a family heirloom. My mother gave it to me." "Your mother?" Eleanor stood so abruptly, her chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh in the restaurant's cultivated quiet. "What's your mother's name?" "Mother, sit down!" Julian hissed, his face flushing with embarrassment. "You're making a scene." But Eleanor couldn't sit. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't do anything but stare at that locket. The locket she'd worn the day she gave birth, the locket her own mother had worn before her, the locket that had supposedly been buried in Woodlawn Cemetery on a rain-soaked Tuesday in 1974. "Sarah," Amelia said quietly, clearly unnerved by the billionaire's intensity. Sarah Russo, she's very sick. This locket is the only valuable thing our family has ever owned." The champagne flute in Eleanor's hand slipped crystal meeting marble in an explosion of sound and light. The golden liquid spread across the floor like spilled sunshine, but Eleanor didn't notice. She was crying, really, crying for the first time in 50 years. Great gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal, a place she'd locked away the day they told her that her daughter was dead. "Mother." Julian was on his feet now, reaching for her arm, but Eleanor wrenched away from him. "How much?" she asked Amelia, her voice raw and desperate. "How much for the locket?" Amelia's hand flew to her throat, fingers curling protectively around the silver starburst. "It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale." Eleanor said the words, automatic, a lifetime of business negotiations speaking through her grief. $5,000. "Mother, have you lost your mind?" Julian's voice was sharp with disbelief. 10,000? Eleanor continued, ignoring her son. Her hands shook as she reached for her purse, a black Hermes bag that itself cost more than Amelia probably made in a year. 20,000, cash, right now. The restaurant had gone silent. Other diners stared openly, their expensive meals forgotten in the face of this unexpected drama. Amelia backed away another step, her face pale beneath the warm lighting. "Mrs. Vance, I don't understand what's happening, but this locket isn't for sale. It's all I have of my mother. 50,000. Eleanor's voice cracked on the number. "Please, you don't understand. That locket. I had one exactly like it. Identical. It was buried with my daughter." The words hung in the air like a confession heavy with decades of grief. Julian's face went from red to white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "Mother, we discussed this. You never had a daughter. You were confused. The doctors said, the doctors lied." Eleanor's screams silenced even the kitchen. "Your grandfather paid them to lie. She was real, she was mine, and they took her from me." Amelia had backed up against the wall, now her manager appearing at her elbow with a concerned expression. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Vance?" "No problem," Julian said quickly, his business voice sliding into place like armor. "My mother isn't feeling well. The heat, you understand. We'll be leaving." "We're not going anywhere," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to something dangerous, something that had built empires and crushed competitors. "Not until she tells me where she got that locket." "I told you," Amelia said, her voice stronger now, protective anger flashing in those honey eyes. "It was my mother's. She's had it since before I was born. It's the only thing she had from her own mother, my grandmother. We don't know who she was, only that she loved my mother enough to make sure she had this." Eleanor's knees buckled. Julian caught her, lowering her into a chair, while snapping his fingers at a hovering waiter for water. But Eleanor didn't want water. She wanted the truth. She wanted her daughter. She wanted 50 years back. "What hospital was your mother born in?" she asked Amelia, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know. She was adopted. The records were sealed." "What year, Moi? 1974. Amelia's voice was gentle now, as if she understood she was speaking to someone balanced on the edge of shattering. "March 15th, 1974. Eleanor let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 3 days. They kept her for 3 days before they told me she died. March 18th, they said. Respiratory failure, they said. Such a tragedy, they said. "Mother, stop this, Julian commanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He was staring at Amelia now, something calculating in his gray eyes. "This is obviously some kind of coincidence. Or worse, His gaze sharpened. Some kind of con. A con? Amelia's manager, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped forward. Sir, Amelia has worked here for 3 years. She's one of our best. I don't care if she's worked here since birth, Julian snapped. My mother is Eleanor Vance. Do you have any idea how many people try to take advantage of her? How many sob stories we hear every day? I haven't asked for anything, Amelia protested, her cheeks flushing with indignation. She's the one offering me money. Classic long con, Julian said coldly. Wear something you know will catch her attention, play innocent when she notices, wait for the payoff. Julian, stop, Eleanor said, but her son was on a roll now, years of protecting the family fortune, turning him into an attack dog. How much do you really want? He asked Amelia. 100,000, $1 million. What's your price to disappear and take that fake locket with you? It's not fake. Amelia's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. This locket is the only thing of value my mother owns. She's dying, okay? She has cancer and the treatments have taken everything we had. I work double shifts just to keep her comfortable. So no, Mr. Vance, I don't want your money. I just want to finish my shift so I can go home and sit with my mother while she still remembers my name. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor stood slowly, her movements careful, as if she might shatter if she moved too quickly. What kind of cancer? She asked softly. Amelia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Pancreatic, stage 4. The doctors say, they say weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky. The locket, Eleanor said, her voice stronger now. Has it ever been opened? Opened, Amelia frowned. It doesn't open, it's solid. Eleanor's heart raced. No, it's not. There's a hidden mechanism. My mother showed me when she gave it to me. You press here. She gestured to her own throat and turned counterclockwise. There's a compartment inside. Amelia's fingers moved to the locket, hesitant. I don't want to break it. You won't. Please. The restaurant held its collective breath as Amelia's fingers found the hidden catch. There was a tiny click, almost inaudible, and the starburst opened like a flower blooming in fast forward. Inside, barely visible, was a piece of paper, no bigger than a fingernail. With trembling fingers, Amelia unfolded it. The paper was yellow with age, the ink faded but still legible. She read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. For my Lily, find me, E.V. Eleanor's sob echoed through the restaurant. Lily. I named her Lily, after my grandmother. They said I was delirious that I never named her, but I did. I whispered it to her when they put her in my arms for those few precious minutes. This proves nothing, Julian said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was staring at Amelia's face now, really looking at her, and Eleanor could see the moment recognition dawned. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, the way she held her head when she was defensive, all echoes of Eleanor herself at that age. My mother, Amelia said slowly, has a birthmark on her shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. Eleanor's hand flew to her own shoulder, where an identical mark lay hidden beneath her designer suit. Family trait. My mother had it. I have it. Lily had it. Coincidence, Julian said weakly. There's one way to know for sure, Eleanor said, her voice steady now with purpose. DNA test. If Sarah Russo is my daughter, if she's Lily, it will show. My mother is dying, Amelia said quietly. She doesn't need this upheaval. She doesn't need false hope or rich people playing games with our lives. It's not a game, Eleanor said fiercely. I have spent 50 years mourning a daughter I thought was dead. 50 years of waking up every March 18th and visiting an empty grave. If there's even a chance, even the smallest possibility that she's alive, that you're my granddaughter, I need to know." "And if we are," Amelia challenged, "what then?" "You waltz into our lives with your billions and your fancy clothes and your son who thinks we're con artists. My mother has weeks to live. What could you possibly offer her now, except confusion and pain?" "Time," Eleanor said simply. "I can offer her time. The best doctors in the world. Experimental treatments. Whatever it takes." "Medicine isn't magic," Amelia said, but there was a desperate hope in her voice now. The doctors at Mount Sinai said," Eleanor interrupted. "But there are other doctors, other treatments, things that cost more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes, but that I could arrange with a phone call." "Mother," Julian warned, "you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And if this is a con, then I'll have lost money," Eleanor snapped. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But if there's a chance I could have my daughter back, even for a day, even for an hour, it's worth everything I have." She turned back to Amelia, who stood frozen, the open locket still in her hand. "Please, let me meet her. Let me see her. If she's not Lily, I'll walk away. But if she is," Amelia prompted, "then I'll spend whatever time she has left trying to make up for the 50 years that were stolen from us." Amelia was quiet for a long moment, studying Eleanor's face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "She's at St. Mary's Hospital, room 314. Visiting hours end at 8. Eleanor glanced at her watch. It was barely 3 o'clock. 5 hours. 5 hours until she might see her daughter again. Or 5 hours until her heart broke all over again. "I'll need to prepare her," Amelia said. "She doesn't know she's adopted. The people who raised her, my grandparents, they died when I was young. They never told her the truth. They kept my daughter and never told her who she really was." Eleanor's voice was sharp with fresh pain. "They loved her," Amelia said defensively. "They gave her a good life. We never had much money, but we had love. She was happy." Eleanor wanted to rage, to scream about stolen years and lost opportunities, but she could see the protectiveness in Amelia's stance, the way she positioned herself as a shield between Eleanor and the mother she was defending. It was exactly how Eleanor would have protected Lily if she'd been given the chance. "Thank you," she said instead, the words difficult but necessary. "For taking care of her, for loving her when I couldn't." Julian made a disgusted sound. "This is insane. Mother, you can't seriously be considering—" "I'm going to see her," Eleanor said firmly, "with or without your approval." "Then you're going without me," Julian said, standing abruptly. "When this turns out to be exactly the con I know it is, don't come crying to me." He stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Eleanor and Amelia standing in the wreckage of spilled champagne and shattered crystal. The other diners had returned to their meals, though Eleanor could feel their curious glances like small needles against her skin. "I should get back to work," Amelia said uncertainly. "My manager—" "Go," Eleanor said. "Take the rest of the day off. Be with your mother. I'll speak to your manager." "You don't have to. Please." Eleanor's voice broke on the word. "Let me do this one small thing." Amelia nodded, then surprised Eleanor by reaching out and squeezing her hand gently. "She's wonderful, you know. My mother. Even sick, even in pain, she still makes everyone around her smile. If she is your daughter, you should be proud of who she became." Eleanor watched Amelia leave the locket still open in her hand, the tiny message visible, "Find me." After 50 years, perhaps Lily finally had. The manager appeared at her elbow, wringing his hands. "Mrs. Vance, I apologize for any disturbance." "There was no disturbance," Eleanor said crisply, her business persona sliding back into place like armor. "Amelia has a family emergency and needs the rest of the day off. With pay, of course. In fact," she reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook. "I'd like to make a donation to your staff emergency fund. 50,000 should do to start." The manager's eyes widened. "That's very generous, Mrs. Vance, but—" "It's nothing," Eleanor said, and meant it. She would have given every penny she had for the possibility that had just walked into her life on worn Waitress shoes. She left the restaurant in a daze, her driver materializing at her elbow, as if summoned by magic. "Where to, Mrs. Vance?" "Home," she said automatically, then, "No, the office. I need to make some calls." The ride to Vance Industries took 20 minutes, but Eleanor experienced it in fragments, the blur of traffic, the honk of horns, the pressure of her phone in her hand, as she scrolled through contacts she hadn't used in years. By the time she reached her corner office on the 40th floor, she had already set several things in motion. "Margaret," she called to her assistant, who appeared in the doorway within seconds. "I need you to contact Dr. Harrison at Johns Hopkins. Tell him I need a consultation immediately. Price is no object." "Of course, Mrs. Vance. Regarding pancreatic cancer, stage 4. And get me Dr. Yamamoto from Tokyo. He's doing experimental treatments that the FDA hasn't approved yet. Find out what it would take to get a patient into his program." Margaret, who had been with Eleanor for 20 years and had seen everything, didn't even blink. "Right away. Anything else?" "Yes." Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the city that she'd conquered one building at a time. "I need you to find out everything you can about Sarah Russo. Born March 15, 1974. Adopted. Current patient at St. Mary's Hospital." Discreetly, very. Margaret left, and Eleanor was alone with her thoughts for the first time since seeing the locket. She sank into her desk chair, the leather creaking under her weight, and allowed herself to remember. Anthony had been beautiful in that dangerous way that made fathers lock up their daughters and mothers warn against broken hearts. He'd been a musician playing guitar in the kind of clubs her father would have had burned to the ground rather than let her enter. But she'd been 18 and rebellious, tired of being Charles Vance's perfect daughter, tired of dinner parties where her future was discussed like she wasn't even in the room. She'd snuck out one night to hear music in the village, and there he was on stage with his dark eyes and darker smile singing about freedom and love and all the things she'd never been allowed to have. He'd noticed her immediately, hard not to notice the girl in the designer dress trying to blend in with the bohemian crowd, and had dedicated his next song to the princess who'd wandered into the wrong fairy tale. They'd talked until dawn, sitting on the fire escape of his tiny apartment, sharing a bottle of wine and dreams too big for the narrow confines of their different worlds. He was going to change music. She was going to change the world. Together, they were going to be extraordinary. For 6 months, she lived a double life. Perfect daughter by day, attending charity galas and business dinners, smiling for the society photographers. By night, she was just Ellie, sitting in smoky clubs, listening to Anthony play, falling so deeply in love that she couldn't imagine a life without him. The pregnancy was an accident, but not a surprise. They'd been careless drunk on youth and possibility. Anthony had been thrilled spinning her around in his tiny apartment, talking about baby names and teaching their child to play guitar. Eleanor had been terrified knowing what her father would do when he found out. She'd been right to be afraid. Charles Vance had built his empire on control, and his daughter's pregnancy, especially with a nobody musician, was the ultimate loss of it. The confrontation had been brutal. Either she gave up the baby and never saw Anthony again, or he would destroy them both. And he'd meant it. Charles Vance had the power to ruin lives with a phone call, to make people disappear in all the ways that mattered. "I'll raise the child myself," she'd pleaded. "I'll leave the family, give up my inheritance." "And live on what?" her father had asked coldly. "That boy's dreams. You think love pays rent, Eleanor. You think it buys medicine when the baby's sick. You're a child playing at being an adult. I'm saving you from a life of poverty and regret." The worst part was that Anthony had agreed. Oh, he'd fought at first, raged about love conquering all. But when Charles had shown him the reality, the blacklisting that would follow him anywhere he tried to play, the legal troubles that would mysteriously appear, the accidents that might befall him, he'd folded like a cheap suit. "Maybe it's better this way, Ellie," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "What kind of life could I give you? Give a baby, your father's right. I'm nobody." She'd never seen him again. Heard he'd moved to California, got a record deal eventually, though nothing ever came of it. She'd stopped looking him up after a while. It hurt too much. The baby Lily had been born on March 15th, 1974, at a private clinic her father had arranged. Eleanor had held her for exactly 3 minutes before the nurse took her away for tests. She'd had Anthony's dark hair and Eleanor's gray eyes, and when she'd wrapped her tiny hand around Eleanor's finger, Eleanor had felt her heart reorganize itself around this tiny, perfect person. "Her name is Lily," she'd whispered to the nurse. "Please tell them her name is Lily." 3 days later, her father had come to her room with that careful expression he wore when delivering bad news about business rivals he'd destroyed. "There were complications," he'd said. "The baby didn't make it. Respiratory failure. These things happen, Eleanor. It's for the best. You can move on now, have the life you were meant to have." She'd screamed, fought, demanded to see her daughter's body, but they'd sedated her, and when she woke up, Lily had already been buried. A tiny headstone in Woodlawn Cemetery with just the dates. No name. Her father hadn't thought she deserved one. Eleanor had visited that grave every year on March 18th, bringing flowers and apologies and all the love she'd never been able to give. She'd married eventually, a suitable match her father had approved of, had Julian built her empire. But there was always a lily-shaped hole in her life, a phantom pain where her daughter should have been. And now, 50 years later, there was a chance, a slim, impossible chance, that it had all been a lie. That her father had done something even more cruel than letting her daughter die. He'd let her live, but somewhere else with someone else, never knowing her real mother was mourning her every single day. Eleanor's phone rang, pulling her from the past. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. "Dr. Harrison can see you tomorrow at noon," her assistant said without preamble. "Yamamoto is interested but needs to review medical records first. And Mrs. Vance, I found something about Sarah Russo." Eleanor's heart stopped. "What?" "The adoption records were sealed, but the hospital she was born at, it was the same private clinic your father used for all his delicate matters. And the date of adoption was March 18th, 1974. 3 days after Sarah was born." Eleanor's hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles went white. The adoptive parents. Frank and Maria Russo. He was a construction worker, she was a seamstress. They'd been trying to have children for years. The adoption was arranged through a private agency that, Margaret paused, that your father owned through a shell company. "Of course he did." Eleanor laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "He couldn't just kill her. That would have been too messy. Better to give her away like she was an inconvenient business asset." "There's more," Margaret said quietly. The Russos received a monthly payment for 18 years. Enough to keep them comfortable, but not enough to raise questions. The payments came from another shell company my father owned, Eleanor finished. He paid them to keep my daughter. It appears so, Mrs. Vance. Do you want me to contact legal? If this is true, there might be grounds for no. Eleanor stood her decision made. No lawyers, no lawsuits. Sarah Russo has weeks to live. I won't spend them in court fighting over what my father did 50 years ago. I just want to know my daughter if she'll let me. Of course. Is there anything else? Yes. Find out everything you can about Amelia Russo. Education, work history, everything. If she's my granddaughter, I want to know everything about her. I'll have a report within the hour. Eleanor ended the call and returned to the window. The city spread out below her, all glass and steel and ambition. She'd built half of it either directly or through the companies she controlled. She had everything a person could want: money, power, respect. But she would have traded it all for one more minute with the daughter she'd held for 3. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a message from Amelia. I told her someone wants to meet her. Someone who might have known her birth mother. She's confused but curious. Visiting hours start at 5. Please, be gentle with her. She's fragile right now. Eleanor typed back, thank you. I will be there at 5. 4 hours. 4 hours to figure out how to introduce herself to the daughter who didn't know her, who had lived a complete life without her. 4 hours to prepare for either the greatest joy or the greatest disappointment of her life. She called Margaret back. Clear my schedule for the next month. The Singapore merger. Julian can handle it, or it can wait. I don't care. Mrs. Vance, are you all right? Eleanor considered the question. Was she all right? She'd just discovered that her entire life had been built on a lie. That her father had stolen her daughter and given her to strangers. That she'd mourned a living person for 50 years. That she might be a grandmother to a young woman who served champagne to rich people for a living. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I'm about to find out. She spent the next 3 hours in her office making calls and arrangements. Dr. Harrison would be on standby. Dr. Yamamoto would review Sarah's medical records as soon as they could be sent. A private medical jet was prepared in case they needed to travel for treatment. She moved through the preparations with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to billion-dollar deals, but her hands shook the entire time. At 4:30, she left the office. Her driver raised an eyebrow when she gave him the address for St. Mary's Hospital. It wasn't the kind of place Eleanor Vance typically visited, but said nothing. The hospital was a shock to her system. The walls were dingy beige, the floors scuffed linoleum, the waiting room packed with people who looked exhausted and desperate. This was where her daughter was dying. In this place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. She found the elevator and rode it to the 3rd floor, her designer heels clicking against the floor as she walked down the hallway. Room 314 was at the end of the corridor, the door slightly ajar. She could hear voices inside, Amelia's low and soothing, another woman's weaker but warm. Eleanor stood outside the door for a full minute, her hand raised to knock but unable to complete the motion. Inside that room was either her daughter or a stranger, either the answer to 50 years of prayer or proof that hope was the cruelest emotion of all. Finally, Amelia appeared in the doorway, as if she'd sensed Eleanor's presence. You came, she said simply. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. Rich people say a lot of things they don't mean. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she'd said plenty of things in her life that she hadn't meant, promises broken for the sake of business commitments abandoned when they became inconvenient. But not this. Never this. Is she ready? Eleanor asked. As ready as someone can be to meet a stranger who might change everything she thought she knew about herself, Amelia said. Just remember she's sick. She tires easily, and if it becomes too much, I'll leave, Eleanor promised. I won't hurt her. I've done enough of that already, even if I didn't know it. Amelia studied her for a moment, then stepped aside. Come in. Eleanor entered the room and stopped breathing. Sarah Russo was propped up in the hospital bed, pale and thin, her hair once dark like Anthony's, now gray and brittle from chemotherapy. But her eyes were Eleanor's eyes, gray as winter storms, sharp with intelligence despite the pain medication. You're the woman Amelia told me about, Sarah said, her voice soft but clear. The one who thinks you might have known my birth mother. Eleanor couldn't speak. This was Lily. She knew it with a certainty that went beyond DNA tests or birthmarks or hidden messages in lockets. This was her daughter, stolen and raised by strangers, dying in a public hospital, while Eleanor sat in her ivory tower, counting money that meant nothing. I'm sorry, Sarah said, misinterpreting Eleanor's silence. I know I don't look like much right now. The cancer, it's taken a lot from me. You're beautiful, Eleanor whispered and meant it. Sarah was beautiful the way a sunset was beautiful, precious, because it wouldn't last, heartbreaking, because you couldn't stop it from ending. Sarah smiled, and it was Eleanor's mother's smile, the one from the portraits in the family estate. Amelia says you have a story about my birth mother. I have to admit, I'm curious. My parents, the ones who raised me, they never told me much. Just that she was young and couldn't keep me. Eleanor moved closer, her legs unsteady. There was a chair beside the bed, and she sank into it gratefully. This close, she could see the birthmark on Sarah's shoulder, peeking out from her hospital gown. The same crescent moon that marked all the women in Eleanor's family. She was young, Eleanor said carefully. 18 when she had you, but she wanted to keep you. She wanted that more than anything in the world. Then why didn't she? There was no accusation in Sarah's voice, just curiosity tinged with old sadness. Her father wouldn't let her. He was powerful, controlling. He told her you had died. She only found out today that you might be alive. Sarah's eyes widened. Today? But that was 50 years ago. How could she not know for 50 years? Because her father was very good at keeping secrets, and because she believed him when he said you were gone. She visited your grave every year. An empty grave, as it turns out. My God, Sarah breathed. She thought I was dead all this time. She must be. Is she still alive, my birth mother? Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice. Does she know I'm here? Does she want to meet me? More than anything, Eleanor managed. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she asked the question Eleanor had been dreading. What was her name? Eleanor, she whispered. Her name was Eleanor Vance. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp. Vance, as in, yes. But you're Eleanor Vance. Yes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 50 years of lost time. Sarah stared at Eleanor, her gray eyes, their gray eyes, wide with shock and something else. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Or both. You're saying you're my mother? Sarah's voice was barely audible. Eleanor nodded, tears streaming down her face. I named you Lily, after my grandmother. You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and they told me you died 3 days later. I've been mourning you for 50 years. This is insane, Sarah said, but she was crying too. This can't be real. The locket, Eleanor said desperately. "The one Amelia wears. I put a message in it before they took you away. I thought they'd buried it with you, but somehow you got it. Somehow it found its way back to you." "Mom," Amelia said suddenly, and Eleanor's heart clenched at the word, even though it wasn't directed at her. "Mom, look." She was holding up her phone, showing something to Sarah. A photograph, Eleanor realized. An old newspaper clipping from the society pages. Eleanor recognized it, her wedding photo from 1976 when she'd married Julian's father. She was wearing the locket in the picture, the silver starburst visible against her white dress. "It's the same," Sarah whispered. "It's exactly the same." "There are tests we can do," Eleanor said quickly. "DNA tests, to be sure. But I knew the moment I saw you. You have my mother's smile, my eyes, the birthmark all the women in our family have." Sarah touched her shoulder unconsciously. "My parents, the Russos, they said it was just a coincidence. That lots of people have birthmarks." "Did they tell you anything else about where you came from?" "Just that my birth mother was young and couldn't raise me. They said the adoption was arranged through a private agency, that they never met her. They were good people," Sarah added quickly defensively. "They loved me, gave me everything they could." "I'm glad," Eleanor said, and found that she meant it. "I'm glad you were loved, even if it wasn't by me." "Why now?" Sarah asked. "After 50 years, why did you start looking for me now?" "I wasn't looking. I thought you were dead. But then I saw Amelia's locket, and everything I thought I knew fell apart. My father lied to me, stole you from me, gave you to someone else and let me believe you were gone." "Jesus," Amelia breathed. That's monstrous." "That was my father," Eleanor said bitterly. "Charles Vance didn't let anything stand in the way of what he wanted. Not even his daughter's baby." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the water glass on her bedside table, and Eleanor instinctively moved to help her, their fingers brushing for just a moment. The contact sent electricity through Eleanor's entire body. This was her daughter, alive, real, dying. "I need some time," Sarah said softly, settling back against her pillows. It's a lot to process." "Of course," Eleanor said, starting to rise from the chair, but Sarah's hand shot out, grasping her wrist with surprising strength. "No, don't go. Can you tell me about him?" "My father." Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't spoken about Anthony in decades, had trained herself not to think about him. His name was Anthony DeLuca. He was a musician, guitar player. He had the darkest eyes I'd ever seen, and a smile that could convince you anything was possible. Sarah's eyes lit up despite her exhaustion. "I love music, always have. Used to drive my parents crazy playing records at all hours. They said I got it from somewhere, but they didn't know where." "He would have loved that," Eleanor said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He used to say music was the only honest language, the only way to tell the truth without words getting in the way." "What happened to him?" Amelia asked from her spot by the window, her own eyes red with tears she was trying not to shed. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "My father made sure he disappeared from my life. I heard he went to California, tried to make it in the music business, but after that, nothing. I stopped looking. It hurt too much." The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Sarah's heart monitor and the distant sounds of the hospital beyond the door. Eleanor studied her daughter's face, cataloging every line, every shadow, trying to memorize 50 years of missed moments in whatever time they had left. "Your father," Sarah said suddenly. "Charles Vance." He died about 15 years ago, didn't he? I remember reading about it in the papers. Yes. Heart attack at his desk, which was exactly how he would have wanted to go, working until the very end. Did he ever say anything about what he'd done? Eleanor shook her head. Never. He took it to his grave. I think he genuinely believed he'd done the right thing, saved me from a life of struggle and poverty. He never understood that I would have chosen that life if it meant keeping you. A knock at the door interrupted them, and a doctor entered, young, harried-looking, with the exhausted eyes of someone who'd been on shift too long. Mrs. Russo, sorry to interrupt, but we need to run some tests. It'll take about an hour. Sarah nodded wearily, then looked at Eleanor. Will you come back? If you want me to. I do. Sarah's voice was firm despite her obvious fatigue. We have 50 years to catch up on, and I want to hear all of it. Even if... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Even if we don't have much time left. The unspoken words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor and Amelia found themselves in the hospital cafeteria sitting across from each other over cups of terrible coffee that neither of them touched. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly green pallor. She's really dying, Eleanor said the words feeling like glass in her throat. I just found her, and she's dying. The doctors say weeks, Amelia confirmed quietly. Maybe a month. The cancer has spread everywhere. Her liver, her lungs, her bones. They're just managing pain now. There are other treatments, experimental protocols. I've already made calls. She's tried everything, Amelia interrupted gently. 3 rounds of chemoradiation, 2 clinical trials. She fought so hard, but sometimes the body just gives up. Eleanor's hands clenched around her coffee cup. This can't be how it ends. 50 years of thinking she was dead, and I get what a few weeks. It's not enough. It's more than you had this morning, Amelia pointed out. More than she had. She spent her whole life wondering where she came from, who her birth parents were. At least now she knows. Does she have other children? Besides you? Amelia shook her head. Just me. My father died when I was 10. Car accident. Mom never remarried, said Dad was her one true love, and she didn't need another. It's just been the 2 of us for 15 years. Tell me about her, Eleanor said desperately. Tell me everything. What was she like as a mother? What did she love? What made her laugh? Amelia's face softened. She was the best mother anyone could ask for. Never missed a school play or soccer game, even when she was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She loved old movies, the black and white ones with the glamorous actresses and happy endings. She could quote entire scenes from Casablanca. She made the world's best lasagna, her mother's, my grandmother's recipe. Every Sunday, no matter how tight money was, we had lasagna. Eleanor drank in every word like a woman dying of thirst. These were the things she should have known, the memories she should have been part of. She sang, Amelia continued, all the time. In the shower, while cooking, while driving. She had a beautiful voice but would never sing in public, said she was too shy. But at home the house was always full of music. Anthony would have loved that, Eleanor whispered. He said our children would be born with music in their souls. Children, Amelia asked. There were supposed to be others. We dreamed of a big family, 4 or 5 kids, a house full of noise and laughter and chaos. He came from a large Italian family, and he wanted to recreate that. Instead, I got one child I never knew and another who... She trailed off, thinking of Julian and his cold ambition, his father's son in every way that mattered. Julian, Amelia said, as if reading her thoughts. Your son. My uncle, I suppose. He didn't seem thrilled about any of this. Julian doesn't do emotions well. His father raised him to see them as weaknesses to be exploited. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to change it. He's a good businessman, brilliant even, but he's not warm. Will he make trouble about Mom, I mean? Eleanor's expression hardened. He can try. But I didn't build my empire by letting anyone, including my son, tell me what to do with it. If Sarah is my daughter, and I know she is, then she and you are entitled to everything I have. We don't want your money, Amelia said quickly. That's not what this is about. I know. That's what makes it even more important that you have it. Eleanor reached across the table, covering Amelia's hand with her own. You're my granddaughter. Sarah is my daughter. Do you have any idea what that means to me? Before Amelia could respond, Eleanor's phone rang. Julian's name appeared on the screen. Mother, he said without preamble when she answered. I've had our investigators look into this situation. I didn't ask you to do that. Someone has to protect you from yourself. The Russo woman's story doesn't add up. The adoption records are conveniently sealed. The hospital records from that time were supposedly destroyed in a fire. Your grandfather's doing, no doubt. Mother, listen to yourself. You're constructing a conspiracy theory based on a piece of jewelry and wishful thinking. And a birthmark. And the same gray eyes. And the fact that she was born on the exact day my daughter was adopted 3 days later when I was told Lily died. Coincidences. I'm having a DNA test done. Eleanor cut him off. That will settle it once and for all. There was a pause on the other end. And when it comes back negative, will you accept it, or will you claim that's been falsified too? Why are you so determined for her not to be my daughter? Eleanor asked. What are you so afraid of, Julian? I'm afraid of you being taken advantage of. I'm afraid of you throwing away everything you've built on a fantasy. I'm afraid of losing you to this obsession with a child who died 50 years ago. The last words were said with unexpected emotion, and Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. Julian might be cold, but he was still her son, and in his own way he was trying to protect her. I'm not going anywhere, she said more gently. But I need to know the truth. Can you understand it? No, Julian said flatly. I can't. The past is past, Mother. The only thing that matters is the future, and the future of Vance Industries. There are more important things than the company, Julian. Not to me, he said, and hung up. Eleanor stared at her phone for a moment, then looked at Amelia, who had been listening to her side of the conversation with obvious concern. He's going to be a problem, Amelia said. It wasn't a question. Let me worry about Julian. You focus on your mother, on Sarah. The name still felt foreign on her tongue when for 50 years she'd been Lily in Eleanor's mind. They returned to room 314 to find Sarah awake but clearly exhausted from the tests. She managed a smile when she saw them, though, and Eleanor's heart clenched at how much it looked like her own mother's smile. The doctor says I can go home tomorrow, Sarah said. Well, back to Amelia's apartment. That's been home since I got too sick to take care of myself. Is that what you want? Eleanor asked carefully. Because I could arrange for private care a better facility. I want to die at home, Sarah said simply. Or as close to it as I can get. Amelia's apartment might not be much, but it's where I want to be. Then I'll arrange for nurses' equipment, whatever you need to be comfortable there. Sarah studied her for a long moment. You really are my mother, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes. The way you look at me like I might disappear if you blink." "I thought you had disappeared," Eleanor said. "For 50 years I thought you were gone, and now I'm dying anyway." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, but not bitter. "Life's funny that way. Just when you think you have it figured out, it throws you a curveball." "Don't talk like that," Amelia said, her voice thick with tears. "You're still here. We still have time." "Time for what?" Sarah asked gently. "To pretend this isn't happening, to act like I'm not dying, no baby. If we only have weeks, I want them to be honest weeks. I want to know everything," she said, turning back to Eleanor. "About you, about my father, about the life I might have had. But I also want you to know about the life I did have. It wasn't the one you planned for me, but it was good. I was happy." "Tell me," Eleanor said, settling back in the chair, prepared to stay as long as Sarah could talk. And Sarah did tell her about growing up in Brooklyn with Frank and Maria Russo, who loved her fiercely even if they couldn't give her everything. About school plays and first dates and the boy who broke her heart in 10th grade. About meeting Amelia's father at a friend's wedding. How he'd made her laugh so hard she spilled wine on her dress and didn't even care. Tom was everything, Sarah said, her eyes distant with memory. Funny and kind and patient. When Amelia was born, he cried harder than I did. Said she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen after me. Eleanor listened to every word, drinking in the story of her daughter's life like someone trying to memorize a book before it was taken away. She heard about Sarah's job as a teacher, how she'd loved working with kids even when the pay was terrible. About Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and family vacations to the Jersey Shore. "We didn't have much money," Sarah said, "but we had each other. That was enough." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, and meant it even as her heart broke for all the moments she'd missed. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "What was your life like?" So Eleanor told her about building an empire from the ashes of her broken heart. About marrying Richard Crawford because her father insisted, and learning to respect, if not love him. About Julian's birth, and the way she'd held him and cried remembering another baby she'd held so briefly. "I threw myself into work," Eleanor admitted. "It was easier than feeling. I took every ounce of pain and transformed it into ambition. By the time my father died, I had built something even he couldn't have imagined." "But were you happy?" Sarah asked. Eleanor considered the question. "I was successful, I was respected, I was feared, but happy, no. There was always a piece missing. You were always missing." The room grew quiet as the weight of 50 lost years settled over them. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the dingy hospital walls gold. "I want to do the DNA test," Sarah said suddenly. "Not because I doubt you, I don't. I can feel it somehow that you're my mother. But Julian will never accept it without proof, and I don't want him making trouble for Amelia after I'm gone." "I'll arrange it tomorrow," Eleanor promised. "And I want to see pictures," Sarah continued, "of you when you were young, of my father, of the family I never knew I had. I have albums at home. I'll bring them." "Home," Sarah repeated softly. "Where is home for you?" "A penthouse on 5th Avenue, overlooking Central Park. It's beautiful but empty. Too many rooms for one person." "You live alone?" "For the past 10 years since Richard died. Julian has his own place, his own life. We have dinner once a month to discuss business." Sarah made a soft sound of sympathy. "That sounds lonely." "It is." Eleanor admitted the words, surprising her. She never admitted weakness, never acknowledged the hollow echo of her footsteps in the marble foyer, or the way she sometimes stood at the windows watching families walk through the park below. Mom used to say loneliness was the price of success, Amelia said quietly. That you couldn't have everything. Your mother was wrong, Eleanor said firmly. You can have everything. I just didn't know what everything meant until today. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Visiting hours are ending in 15 minutes. Eleanor felt panic rise in her chest. She couldn't leave, not yet, not when she'd just found her daughter. I'll be back tomorrow, she promised Sarah, first thing in the morning. I'll be here, Sarah said with a weak smile. Not going anywhere just yet. Eleanor stood then on impulse, leaned down and kissed Sarah's forehead. Her daughter's skin was papery and too warm, but she smelled like vanilla and something indefinable that made Eleanor's heart recognize her even after 50 years. Good night, Lily, she whispered, then caught herself. I'm sorry. Sarah. Good night, Sarah. You can call me Lily, Sarah said softly. I think I'd like that. To be Lily to someone, even if just for a little while. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Good night, Lily. She and Amelia walked to the elevator together, neither speaking until they reached the lobby. Thank you, Eleanor said finally, for giving me this chance, for letting me into her life. She needs you, Amelia said simply. I can see it in her eyes. She's been looking for you her whole life without knowing it. Eleanor's driver was waiting outside the black town car, gleaming in the harsh hospital lighting. She turned to Amelia. Can I drive you home? Amelia looked at the car, clearly intimidated. I usually take the subway. Please, let me do this one small thing. They rode in silence through the city streets, Eleanor seeing the neighborhoods change from Manhattan's gleaming towers to the more modest buildings of Queens. Amelia's apartment building was old but well-maintained, with window boxes full of flowers that someone obviously cared for. Third floor, Amelia said. Not much, but it's home. It's where Lily wants to be, Eleanor said. That makes it perfect. Amelia started to get out, then paused. She's going to want to see him, you know. Anthony, her father. Do you think you could find him? Eleanor's stomach clenched. She hadn't thought about that, about Anthony being part of this reunion. I'll try, she promised, though the thought of seeing him again after 50 years terrified her almost as much as losing Lily a second time. Back in her penthouse, Eleanor stood at the windows looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, her daughter was dying in a hospital bed. Her granddaughter was probably crying in a small apartment. And her son was probably plotting how to protect the family fortune from what he saw as interlopers. She picked up her phone and called Margaret, who answered on the first ring despite the late hour. I need you to find someone, Eleanor said without preamble. Anthony DeLuca, musician. He'd be in his 70s now. Last known location was California in the mid-1970s. I'll start searching immediately. Anything else? Yes. Set up a medical trust for Sarah Russo and Amelia Russo. Start with 10 million. Make sure it's ironclad, something Julian can't challenge. Consider it done. Mrs. Vance, may I ask what's happening? I found my daughter Margaret, the one I thought died 50 years ago. She's alive. There was a pause. My God, that's wonderful. She's dying. Eleanor continued the words like knives. Pancreatic cancer. Weeks to live. I'm so sorry. So am I. But at least I get to say goodbye this time. At least I get to tell her I love her. After ending the call, Eleanor went to her study and pulled out photo albums she hadn't looked at in decades. Pictures of herself at 18, young and rebellious, and so in love with Anthony, she glowed with it. She found one photo she'd hidden in the back of an album, Anthony playing guitar, at some long-forgotten club, his dark hair falling over his eyes, that dangerous smile that had changed everything. There was another photo, one she'd taken herself, Anthony holding a guitar, pick up to her pregnant belly, laughing as he taught the baby music. They'd been so young, so naive, thinking love could conquer anything. She selected a few photos to bring to the hospital tomorrow, then found herself in the room. She never entered the one that would have been a nursery if things had been different. She'd had it decorated when she was pregnant with Julian, but never used it. He'd had a nursery in the opposite wing, closer to his nanny's room. This room still had the rocking chair she'd bought when she was pregnant with Lily, thinking she'd rock her baby to sleep every night. The chair had never been used, but she'd never been able to get rid of it either. Eleanor sat in it now, 50 years too late, and let herself cry for all the nights she hadn't rocked her daughter to sleep, all the stories she hadn't read, all the lullabies she hadn't sung. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amelia. "She's asking for you. I know visiting hours are over, but if you want to come back." Eleanor was out the door before she finished reading the message. The hospital at night was a different creature than during the day. Quieter, but somehow more alive with the real business of living and dying. Eleanor found her way to Sarah's room, where Amelia was sitting by the bed, holding her mother's hand. "She had a bad spell," Amelia explained quietly. "Pain. They've given her more morphine, but she keeps asking for you." Eleanor took the chair on the other side of the bed, taking Sarah's other hand. It was so thin she could feel every bone, but Sarah squeezed back with surprising strength. "Tell me about when I was born," Sarah whispered, her eyes glazed from the pain medication, but still alert. "Tell me about the 3 days you had me." So Eleanor did. She told her about the private clinic with its smell of antiseptic and roses from the garden outside. About the first moment she saw her red and squalling and perfect. About counting her fingers and toes, marveling at the tiny fingernails, the way her mouth made a perfect O when she yawned. "You were so alert," Eleanor remembered. "The nurse said newborns couldn't really see yet, but you looked right at me like you knew exactly who I was. And when I held you, you stopped crying immediately, like you knew you were safe." "What about my father? Was he there?" Eleanor shook her head. "They wouldn't let him come. My father had already scared him off by then. But I told you about him. Whispered stories about his music and his laugh and how much he would have loved you. I sang you the song he wrote for me, though I couldn't carry a tune to save my life." "What song?" Sarah asked. Eleanor hesitated, then began to hum badly, and off-key, a melody she hadn't thought of in 50 years. She couldn't remember all the words, just fragments. "Eleanor, my rebel girl, you set my world on fire. Eleanor, my whole world, you're all that I desire." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, though Eleanor knew she was being kind. "Even if you can't sing." "Anthony used to say I sang like a cat in a blender," Eleanor said, surprising herself by laughing at the memory. "But he loved me anyway." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, 3 generations of women linked by hands and secrets, and the strange turns of fate. Finally, Sarah's breathing deepened as she fell into real sleep, the morphine pulling her under. "You should go home," Amelia said softly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." But Eleanor couldn't make herself let go of Sarah's hand. "What if she dies tonight? What if this is all the time I get?" "She won't," Amelia said with more confidence than she probably felt. "She's stubborn. Gets that from you, I think. She'll hold on until she's ready to go, and she's not ready yet. Too many questions still to ask." Eleanor finally released Sarah's hand and stood her body protesting after hours in the uncomfortable chair. "You'll call me if anything changes. Immediately." As Eleanor left the hospital for the second time that night, she thought about the strange mathematics of love and loss. 50 years of mourning for perhaps 50 days of knowing. It wasn't fair, but then nothing about this story had been fair from the beginning. But she had found her daughter. Lily was alive, if not for much longer, and that would have to be enough. The next morning arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind that turned the city into a watercolor painting of blurred edges and reflected lights. Eleanor had barely slept, spending most of the night going through old photographs and documents, searching for any trace of what her father had done. At 6 a.m., Margaret called with news. "I found him," she said without preamble. "Anthony DeLuca. He's alive, living in a senior community in Santa Monica. He never made it big in music, worked as a session guitarist for years, then taught music at a community college. Retired 5 years ago." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Does he have a family?" "Never married, no children on record. His neighbor, who I spoke with under the pretense of a documentary about session musicians, said he's something of a recluse. Plays guitar on the beach at sunset, but otherwise keeps to himself. Never married. No children. Had he spent 50 years mourning too?" "I need his contact information," Eleanor said. "I'm sending it now. Mrs. Vance, are you sure about this? Opening these old wounds? They never closed, Margaret. They just scabbed over. Maybe it's time to let them bleed clean." By 8 o'clock, Eleanor was back at the hospital with an armload of photo albums and a heart full of dread about the conversation she needed to have. She found Sarah sitting up in bed, looking marginally better than the night before, though the dark circles under her eyes had deepened. "You came back," Sarah said with evident relief. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought maybe I dreamed it all. The morphine makes everything feel unreal sometimes." Eleanor set the albums on the bedside table and took her usual chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," Sarah said with a weak smile. "But slower than expected, which I suppose is good news." Amelia entered carrying coffee and bagels from a shop down the street. "Mom insisted she wanted real food, not hospital breakfast." "The eggs here taste like rubber," Sarah explained, taking a small bite of bagel. Even that seemed to exhaust her, but she smiled. "Tell me more. Tell me everything." So Eleanor opened the photo albums, and they spent the morning traveling through time. Sarah traced her fingers over pictures of Eleanor at 18, at the grandparents she'd never known, at the sprawling Vance estate that had been sold years ago. "You were beautiful," Sarah said, looking at a photo of Eleanor in her debutante gown. "I was miserable," Eleanor corrected. "Being presented to society like a prize cow at auction. Your grandfather had already picked out 3 suitable husbands for me to choose from. Meeting Anthony saved me from that, at least for a while." She turned to a hidden pocket in the back of the album and pulled out the photo of Anthony she'd kept all these years. Sarah gasped softly when she saw it. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, he's handsome," Eleanor supplied with a sad smile. "He was. Dangerously so." "I was going to say he looks kind," Sarah said, studying the photo intently. "There's something in his eyes. Sadness, maybe. Like he knew how things would end." "We both knew, I think. Some part of us always knew it was too good to last. But we loved each other anyway. Maybe more because we knew our time was limited." "Do you know what happened to him?" Amelia asked. Eleanor took a breath. This was the moment. "He's alive, living in California, Santa Monica." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at her mother, the photo trembling in her thin hands. "He's alive," she whispered. "My father is alive. I just found out this morning. I haven't contacted him yet. I wanted to ask you first if you'd want to meet him." "Yes," Sarah said immediately, then seemed to reconsider. "Does he know about me?" "He knew I was pregnant. He knew they were taking you away. But he thinks what I thought, that you died as a baby." "My God," Sarah breathed. 50 years, both of you thinking I was dead, while you thought we didn't want you." Eleanor added, the irony bitter in her mouth. "I need to meet him," Sarah said with sudden urgency. Before I can't. Will you call him?" Eleanor pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had his number. Margaret had sent it. "But what did you say after 50 years? How did you explain?" She dialed before she could lose her nerve. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She was about to hang up when a voice answered, older, rougher, but unmistakably Anthony. "Hello?" "Anthony." His name came out as barely a whisper. There was a long pause. Then Eleanor Vance. "Yes." "Jesus Christ, Ellie. Is it really you?" The old nickname broke something in her chest. No one had called her Ellie in 50 years. "It's me, Anthony. I need to tell you something. Can you sit down?" "You're scaring me, Ellie. What's wrong?" "Our daughter didn't die." The silence stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Then she heard what sounded like a sob. "What?" "Lily, our daughter, she didn't die. My father lied. He gave her to another family, told me she was dead. I just found out yesterday. She's alive, Anthony. She's alive, but she's sick. She's dying. She wants to meet you." "This isn't... Ellie, if this is some kind of... It's not a joke. I'm sitting with her right now in St. Mary's Hospital in New York. Her name is Sarah now. Sarah Russo. She has your dark hair and my gray eyes, and she's dying of cancer, and she wants to meet her father before it's too late." She could hear him crying now, great gasping sobs that reminded her of her own reaction the day before. "Can I talk to her?" he asked when he could speak again. "Please, Ellie. Let me talk to her." Eleanor handed the phone to Sarah with trembling hands. "It's your father." Sarah took the phone like it was made of spun glass. "Hello." Her voice was tiny, uncertain. "Is this really... Are you really my father?" Eleanor couldn't hear Anthony's response, but she saw its effect on Sarah's face, wonder and joy and grief all mixed together. "I have so many questions," Sarah said. "So many things I want to know." She listened for a moment, then laughed a real laugh, not the weak attempts she'd been managing. "Yes, I love music. Always have. My daughter Amelia says I can't carry a tune, but I love it anyway." They talked for 20 minutes, Sarah asking questions, and Anthony apparently telling stories because she kept laughing and crying in equal measure. Finally, she handed the phone back to Eleanor. "Ellie," Anthony said, and her name in his voice still did things to her heart. "I can catch a flight today. I can be there tonight. She's very sick, Anthony. I don't want you to be shocked when you see her. I don't care if she's sick. She's our daughter. She's alive. That's all that matters." "There's something else. She has a daughter, Amelia. Your granddaughter." "Jesus." His voice broke again. "A granddaughter. We're grandparents, Ellie." The "we" in that sentence hit her unexpectedly. They hadn't been a "we" in 50 years, but suddenly they were united again in finding their daughter, in losing her again, in discovering a granddaughter they'd never dreamed could exist. "Text me your flight information," Eleanor said. "I'll have a car pick you up." "Ellie, what about your husband, your family?" "My husband died 10 years ago. My son, Julian, is complicated, but that doesn't matter right now. The only thing that matters is Sarah." After she hung up, the three women sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. "He sounded nice," Sarah said finally. "Excited. He kept saying he couldn't believe it, that it was a miracle." "He was always emotional," Eleanor remembered. "Wore his heart on his sleeve. It's what made his music so good, he couldn't hide what he felt." A knock on the door interrupted them. Julian stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mother, might I have a word?" "Not now, Julian." "Yes, now." He stepped into the room, his presence immediately making it feel smaller, colder. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The trust you set up this morning, $10 million to complete strangers." "They're not strangers," Eleanor said evenly. "Sarah is my daughter. Amelia is my granddaughter." "Based on what?" "A feeling, a piece of jewelry." He turned to Sarah, his gray eyes so like Eleanor's, so like Sarah's, hard as flint. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now." "Julian," Eleanor warned. "No, Mother. I've been patient. I've indulged this fantasy. But transferring millions to these people, that's where I draw the line." "It's my money," Eleanor reminded him coldly. "It's the family's money. Money that should go to legitimate heirs, not opportunists who show up with a sob story and a cheap locket." "How dare you?" Amelia said, standing up, her honey eyes flashing with anger. "We didn't ask for anything. We didn't even know who she was until yesterday." "How convenient," Julian sneered. "And I suppose you had no idea that Eleanor Vance was worth billions, no idea that claiming to be her long-lost daughter would set you up for life." "Stop it," Sarah said quietly from the bed. "Please. I don't want money. I don't want anything except to know where I came from. If you need proof, we'll do DNA tests, whatever it takes." "DNA tests can be faked," Julian said dismissively. "By whom?" Eleanor demanded. "How would they even know about Lily? No one knew except my father, and he's been dead for 15 years. Records exist. Stories get passed down. Someone could have pieced it together, found the perfect marks. A sick woman who looks vaguely like you, a locket that resembles one you used to wear." "The birthmark," Eleanor said. "She has the family birthmark." "Lots of people have birthmarks. The date. She was born the exact day Lily was. Coincidence. The adoption records from the clinic my father owned." That stopped Julian for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Circumstantial." "What would it take?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious now. "What would it take for you to believe?" "Nothing," Julian said flatly. "Because I know what this is. I've seen it before. Desperate people creating elaborate stories to separate wealthy marks from their money." "You're being played, Mother." "I'm dying," Sarah said softly. "What could I possibly gain from this, except a few weeks of knowing who my birth mother was?" "Sympathy," Julian said coldly. "A dying woman is the perfect con artist. No one wants to question her. No one wants to upset her. You play on my mother's emotions, get her to set up trusts and transfer assets, then miraculously recover once the money is secure." "Julian Crawford," Eleanor said, using his full name like a weapon. "If you say one more word, I will cut you out of everything. The company, the money, all of it." Julian's face went white, then red. "You wouldn't." "Try me." Mother and son stared at each other, decades of complicated history crackling between them. Julian had always been more his father's son than hers, raised to see emotion as weakness and family as a business arrangement. But surely somewhere in him there had to be a spark of humanity. "Fine," Julian said finally. "Do the DNA test. When it comes back negative, and it will, I expect you to cut all contact with these people and seek therapy for this delusion." "And when it comes back positive?" Eleanor asked. "It won't." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I'm trying to protect you, Mother. From them and from yourself. Your desperate need to believe this fantasy is clouding your judgment." After he left the room, felt like it could breathe again. Amelia sank back into her chair, visibly shaken. "He's pleasant," she said sarcastically. "He's protecting what he sees as his," Eleanor said tiredly. Julian has never had to share anything in his life. The idea of a sister of having to split his inheritance, it's his worst nightmare. "We don't want his inheritance," Sarah said for what felt like the 100th time. "I know. That's what makes you dangerous to him. People who don't want money can't be bought, can't be controlled. Julian doesn't know what to do with people like that." A nurse entered to check Sarah's vitals and administer medication. As she worked, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. "Flight lands at 7 p.m., U.S. Airways 432. He'll be here tonight," Eleanor told Sarah. "Your father." Sarah's face lit up despite her exhaustion. "I need to look better. I look like death warmed over." "You look beautiful," Eleanor said firmly. "You look like my daughter." The day passed in a blur of stories and photographs. Sarah told them about her husband Tom, showing them pictures from her own phone, their wedding. Amelia as a baby family, vacations and birthday parties, and all the ordinary moments that make up a life. "He would have loved you," Sarah told Eleanor, showing her a photo of Tom holding a laughing toddler, Amelia. "He always said family was everything. He grew up in foster care, never knew his real parents. He would have been so happy to know you were out there looking for me." Around 3 o'clock, a technician arrived to take DNA samples, blood from both Eleanor and Sarah, though Sarah's veins were so damaged from months of treatment that it took several tries to find one that would work. "Results in 48 hours, the technician said. "Rush order." 24, Eleanor said. "I'll pay whatever it takes." The technician nodded and left with the samples. Sarah dozed fitfully after that, the emotional strain of the day catching up with her weakened body. Eleanor and Amelia sat vigil, not talking much, just being present. At 5 o'clock, Eleanor's phone rang. "Margaret." "Mrs. Vance, I've found something you need to know about. I was digging deeper into the adoption records, and I found payments. Monthly payments from your father's estate to the Russos, but also a large lump sum payment to someone else. A doctor. Dr. Martin Fielding." "The doctor who delivered Lily," Eleanor breathed. "Yes. He received $200,000 3 days after the birth. In 1974, money that was a fortune. He retired immediately after move to Florida, died 5 years ago. He was paid to lie, to tell me she was dead. It appears so. There's more. I found a letter in your father's archived files. You should read it yourself. I'm sending it now." The email arrived moments later. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. It was a letter from her father to his lawyer, dated March 20th, 1974. "The situation has been handled. The child has been placed with appropriate guardians who understand the terms of our arrangement. E has been told the child died. Dr. Fielding has been compensated for his cooperation. Under no circumstances is E to learn the truth. The monthly payments to the Russo family will continue until the child's 18th birthday, at which point all ties will be severed. Destroy this letter after reading." But the lawyer hadn't destroyed it. He'd kept it, filed it away, and after Charles Vance's death, his files had been archived. evidence of the crime waiting 50 years to be discovered. Eleanor showed the letter to Sarah and Amelia. Sarah read it twice, tears streaming down her face. "He really did it," she whispered. "He stole me from you." "I'm going to be sick," Amelia said, and rushed to the small bathroom attached to the room. "All those years," Sarah continued, "the Russos told me my birth mother loved me but couldn't keep me. They were telling the truth, weren't they? They knew more than they ever said." "They probably knew enough to be kind," Eleanor said, "to make sure you knew you were loved, even if they couldn't tell you the whole truth." Amelia emerged from the bathroom, pale but composed. "We should show this to Julian. This is proof." "Julian will say it's forged," Eleanor said bitterly. "He's committed to his version of the truth." Sarah's eyes were growing heavy again, the medication pulling her under. "Will you stay, both of you, until Anthony gets here?" "Of course," Eleanor said. They ordered dinner from a nearby restaurant, soup for Sarah, though she barely managed a few spoonfuls sandwiches for Eleanor and Amelia that neither of them had much appetite for. The waiting was agony, each minute crawling by as they anticipated Anthony's arrival. At 6:30, Eleanor's phone rang. "Julian." "What?" she answered sharply. "I've done my own investigation," he said without preamble. "The Russo woman is exactly who she claims to be. Sarah Russo, adopted daughter of Frank and Maria Russo. But mother, that doesn't mean she's your daughter. I have a letter from your grandfather proving you have a letter Margaret claims to have found. How convenient that it surfaces now, just when you need it." "Julian, why are you doing this?" There was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Younger, almost vulnerable. "Because I've been your only child for 48 years. I know I've been a disappointment. I know I'm not warm or emotional or whatever you wanted me to be. But I'm your son. Your only son. And now suddenly I'm supposed to accept that I have a sister. That you had another child you loved, mourned more." The pain in his voice was unexpected, and Eleanor felt her anger soften slightly. "Julian, having a sister doesn't diminish what you mean to me. Doesn't it? You've been mourning her for 50 years. You visit her grave every year. You've never once visited my father's grave." That was true, Eleanor realized with a start. Richard had been buried with appropriate ceremony, but she'd never felt the need to return. "Your father and I had a business arrangement that became fond over time," Eleanor said carefully. "But Lily was my baby, my first child. The loss was different. And I was what the consolation prize." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You were my son, are my son. I love you, Julian. But not the way you loved her, the one who died. The perfect baby who never disappointed you, never grew up cold and calculating like your father wanted." Eleanor closed her eyes. How had she never seen this? Julian's coldness wasn't just his nature or his father's influence. It was armor against the ghost of a sister he'd never known existed, but had always been competing with. "Come back to the hospital," she said gently. "Meet Sarah properly. Get to know her. She's dying, Julian. She's not a threat to you." "Everything's a threat in business, Mother. You taught me that." "This isn't business. This is family." "Same thing," Julian said, and hung up. Eleanor looked at Sarah, who had been listening with her eyes closed, and Amelia, who was staring out the window at the darkening scum. "He's broken," Sarah said softly. "Your son. He's broken and doesn't know how to fix himself." "Takes one to know one," Eleanor said sadly. At 7:15, Eleanor's phone buzzed. The car service had picked up Anthony from the airport. They'd be at the hospital in 40 minutes, depending on traffic. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, smoothing her thin hair with trembling hands. "How do I look?" "Perfect," Amelia said, kissing her mother's forehead. "You look perfect, Mom." The 40 minutes felt like 40 hours. Eleanor found herself pacing the small room, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum. She'd faced hostile takeovers, billion-dollar negotiations, boardrooms full of men who wanted her to fail. But nothing had prepared her for this, seeing Anthony again, after 50 years introducing him to the daughter they'd both thought was dead. At 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor's heart stopped. Anthony stood in the doorway, and for a moment, time collapsed. He was older, of course, his dark hair gone silver lines mapping his face, his once lean frame softer. But his eyes were the same, dark and warm and full of emotion he'd never learned to hide. "Ellie," he breathed, and then his gaze moved past her to the bed where Sarah lay. His face crumpled. "Oh my God. Lily." "Sarah," she corrected gently. "My name is Sarah, but you can call me Lily if you want." Anthony moved toward the bed like a man in a dream, his guitar-calloused hands shaking. He stopped just short of touching her, as if afraid she might disappear. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the chair. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, Dad." The word broke him. Anthony sank into the chair and took Sarah's hand in both of his, bringing it to his lips. "My baby girl, my Lily. I thought you were dead. They told us you were dead." "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know. But I'm here now. We're all here now." Anthony looked up at Eleanor, who had stayed by the door, giving them space. "Ellie, come here. Please." She moved to the other side of the bed, and for the first time in 50 years, they were together, the family that should have been. Anthony reached across Sarah to take Eleanor's hand, and the three of them formed a circle, connected at last. "Tell me everything," Anthony said to Sarah. "Tell me about your life. Tell me what I missed." Sarah began to talk, her voice growing stronger as she told her father about her childhood, her marriage, her daughter. Anthony listened with the focused attention of a man trying to memorize every word, occasionally laughing or crying at different parts of the story. "You're a teacher," he said wonderingly. "My daughter is a teacher." "Was," Sarah corrected. "Had to stop when I got sick. But yes, 5th grade. The best age old enough to really think, young enough to still believe in magic." "That's beautiful," Anthony said. Then he noticed Amelia standing quietly in the corner. "And you must be—" "Amelia," she said shyly. "Your granddaughter." Anthony's face lit up. "Come here, sweetheart. Let me look at you." Amelia approached slowly, and Anthony studied her face with wonder. "You have your mother's smile, and something around the eyes that's pure Ellie." "She's brilliant," Sarah said proudly. "Works 2 jobs to take care of me and still manages to paint in her spare time." "You paint?" Anthony asked, delighted. "What kind of painting?" "Abstract mostly," Amelia said. "Sometimes portraits. I'm not very good." "She's wonderful," Sarah interrupted. "There's one of her paintings in my apartment, a landscape of Central Park in autumn. It looks like the trees are on fire." They talked for another hour until Sarah's exhaustion became impossible to hide. The nurse came in to give her evening medications, frowning at the crowd around the bed. "Visiting hours ended an hour ago," she said, though not unkindly. "Please," Sarah said. "Just a little longer. My parents just got here." The nurse looked at the three older adults, Eleanor in her designer suit, Anthony in his traveling clothes, Sarah pale and dying in her hospital bed, and something in her face softened. 15 more minutes, she said. But then everyone needs to go so she can rest. After the nurse left, Sarah looked at her parents. She'd started thinking of them that way, as her parents, not Eleanor and Anthony, but Mom and Dad in her mind. I want to go home tomorrow, she said. Back to Amelia's apartment. I want us all to be together away from this place. Whatever time I have left, I want it to be with family. Of course, Eleanor said immediately. I'll arrange for nurses' equipment, whatever you need. And you'll stay? Sarah asked Anthony. You won't go back to California. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, Anthony said firmly. I lost 50 years with you. I'm not losing another day. Eleanor's phone buzzed. A text from Julian. DNA results will be rushed. Should have them by tomorrow afternoon. When they come back negative, this charade ends. She deleted the text without responding. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. But tonight, for the first time in 50 years, her family was complete. Broken, dying, complicated, but complete. As they prepared to leave, Sarah called Eleanor back. Mom. The word was tentative testing. Thank you. For not giving up. For keeping that empty grave, visiting it all those years. Even though I wasn't there somehow, I think I felt it. That someone was loving me, missing me, refusing to let me go. Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, breathing in the scent of her hospital and sickness, yes, but underneath that something essential and familiar. I love you, Lily. Sarah, I love you, my daughter. I love you too, Mom. They were words Eleanor had waited 50 years to hear. They were worth every one of them. The morning of Sarah's discharge dawned bright and cold, the kind of March day that promised spring but delivered winter's last bite. Eleanor had been awake since 4, making arrangements with a precision that bordered on manic. Private ambulance check. Medical equipment delivered to Amelia's apartment check. 3 rotating nurses check. Dr. Harrison on standby check. Everything money could buy except the one thing that mattered, time. Anthony had spent the night at Eleanor's penthouse, neither of them sleeping much, sitting in her living room, with 50 years stretching between them, like an ocean they didn't know how to cross. You never remarried. Eleanor had said somewhere around 2 in the morning, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. How could I? Anthony had responded, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion. You were it for me, Ellie. You were always it. Now they sat in Amelia's small apartment, watching as the medical team transformed the modest living room into a makeshift hospital room. The contrast was jarring. Medical equipment, worth more than the apartment itself, crowding against worn furniture and walls covered with Amelia's paintings. It's too much, Amelia kept saying, wringing her hands as delivery after delivery arrived. This is too much. It's not enough, Eleanor countered, directing the placement of the hospital bed near the window where Sarah could see the sky. Nothing could ever be enough. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up in Astoria, the stairs narrow and creaking. It had taken 4 men to get the hospital bed up, and Eleanor had watched with her heart in her throat, imagining Sarah having to navigate those stairs every day when she could still walk. She loved this place, Amelia said, catching Eleanor's expression. Said it reminded her of the apartment she and Dad had when they first got married. Small, but full of love. Anthony was setting up a sound system he'd insisted on bringing, placing speakers carefully around the room. She needs music, he'd said firmly when Eleanor questioned it. Our daughter needs music. Our daughter. The words still felt surreal, impossible, wonderful. Sarah arrived at noon, the ambulance attendants gentle as they transferred her from the stretcher to the hospital bed. She was pale as paper, her breathing shallow, but her eyes were bright with happiness. "Home," she whispered, looking around the transformed living room. "Oh, this is perfect." It wasn't perfect, Eleanor thought. Perfect would be Sarah, healthy Sarah, with decades ahead of her. Sarah getting to watch Amelia get married and have children of her own. But if this was what they had, she would make it as perfect as possible. Julian arrived unexpectedly at 2:00, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the room, like a cold front moving in. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, Anthony adjusting Sarah's pillows, Eleanor holding her hand, Amelia painting in the corner to distract herself from the reality of her mother's condition. "The DNA results," he said, without preamble, holding up an envelope. "They were delivered to your office. Margaret forwarded them to me." Eleanor's heart stopped. This was it, proof one way or another, though she didn't need it. She knew Sarah was her daughter, the way she knew her own heartbeat. "Open it," Sarah said quietly. "Let's end this uncertainty." Julian tore open the envelope with theatrical precision, his eyes scanning the document. His face went through a series of expressions: confidence, confusion, shock, and finally something that might have been fear. "Well," Eleanor demanded. Julian's voice was hollow when he spoke. "Probability of maternity 99.9%. Probability of shared parentage with Julian Crawford 99.9%. He looked up, his face pale. "She's your daughter. She's my sister." The room erupted. Amelia let out a sob of relief. Anthony pulled Eleanor into an embrace that felt like coming home after 50 years of wandering. Sarah just smiled, tears streaming down her face. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew the moment I saw you. Something in me recognized you." Julian stood frozen in the doorway, the test results crumpling in his grip. His entire worldview had just shattered, and Eleanor Hong could see him trying to piece it back together, to find some angle, some explanation that didn't require him to accept this new reality. "This changes nothing," he said finally, his voice hard. "Legally, I mean. The will, the company structure." "Julian," Eleanor said sharply, "your sister is dying. Could you please, for once in your life, think about something other than money?" "My sister," Julian repeated as if testing the words. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her for the first time. "I don't have a sister. I've never had a sister." "You've always had a sister," Eleanor corrected gently. "You just didn't know it." Julian moved further into the room, approaching Sarah's bed, with the caution of someone approaching a wild animal. Sarah watched him with those gray eyes, their mother's eyes, his eyes, and extended a thin hand. "Hello, little brother," she said with a weak smile. "I know this is strange. It's strange for me too, but maybe we could try, just for whatever time we have." Julian stared at her hand for a long moment. Eleanor held her breath, knowing this was a crossroads for her son. He could choose his father's path, cold, calculating, protecting his interests above all else, or he could choose something different. Finally, slowly, Julian took Sarah's hand. His grip was awkward, uncertain, but he held on. "I don't know how to have a sister," he admitted, the words seemingly pulled from him against his will. "I don't know how to have a brother," Sarah replied. "But I had a wonderful teacher once who told me the best way to learn something is to just start where you are and go from there." Julian sat down in the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand, as if he didn't quite know what to do with it. "Tell me about yourself," he said stiffly. "Tell me about Our sister. Sarah began to talk, and gradually, incrementally, Eleanor watched her son's rigid posture soften. He asked questions, hesitant at first, then with growing interest. When Sarah mentioned she'd been a teacher, he said, "I hated school, except for math. I was good at math." "I was terrible at math," Sarah laughed. "Amelia had to help me balance my checkbook." "I could help," Julian offered, then seemed surprised at himself. "I mean, if you needed, with finances or bills or—" "That's kind of you," Sarah said warmly. The afternoon wore on, the strange new family finding its rhythm. Anthony played guitar, old songs, new songs, making them up as he went. Sarah dozed between conversations, the pain medication making her drift in and out. Eleanor found herself memorizing every moment, every word, every expression on her daughter's face. Dr. Harrison arrived at 4 to examine Sarah, his face grave as he reviewed her charts. "How long?" Eleanor asked him quietly in the kitchen, while the others stayed with Sarah. "Days, maybe a week," he said gently. "Her organs are shutting down. We're past the point of treatment, Mrs. Vance. Now it's about comfort." "There must be something." "There isn't. I'm sorry. Sometimes medicine has limits even for those who can afford unlimited care." Eleanor gripped the kitchen counter, her knuckles white. "It's not fair. I just found her." "No," Dr. Harrison agreed. "It's not fair at all." When they returned to the living room, Sarah was awake and alert, laughing at something Anthony had said. She looked almost healthy in that moment, animated and alive, and Eleanor understood the cruelty of terminal illness, these glimpses of the person underneath the disease, reminders of what was being lost. "Mom," Sarah said, and Eleanor's heart still skipped at the word. "Tell me about your wedding. Your real wedding, not the one to Julian's father. The one you planned with Anthony." Eleanor smiled, sinking into the memory. "We were going to elope. Run away to Vegas, get married by an Elvis impersonator. Your father thought it would be romantic." "It would have been," Anthony protested. "The real Elvis impersonator, not one of those cheap imitators." "We had it all planned," Eleanor continued. "We were going to leave on a Tuesday." "Wednesday," Anthony corrected. "Tuesday," Eleanor insisted, laughing. "I remember because I had that charity luncheon I was going to skip. The one where your father was announcing your engagement to that banker's son," Anthony added with a grin. "Harrison Whitfield III, Eleanor recalled. "God, he was boring. Talked about interest rates at dinner parties." "You were going to leave a note," Sarah said, clearly delighted by the story. A real runaway bride moment. "Better," Anthony said. "She was going to leave her engagement ring on her father's desk with a copy of our marriage certificate." "We were so young," Eleanor marveled. "We thought love could conquer everything." "It can," Sarah said firmly. "Look at us. 50 years later, here we are. Love conquered death in a way. The love you had for me, even when you thought I was gone, it brought us back together." The room fell silent, the weight of truth in her words settling over them. Even Julian seemed affected, his usual skepticism nowhere to be seen. As evening approached, the nurse arrived for the night shift. A kind-faced woman named Patricia, who took one look at the assembled family and understood immediately what was happening here. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me," she said tactfully. "Take all the time you need." They had dinner together, Chinese takeout that Eleanor had never eaten in her life, but that Sarah insisted was the best in Queens. Sarah managed a few bites of wonton soup, declaring it better than anything she'd had in the hospital. "Tell me about the company," Sarah said to Julian. "Mom says you run most of it now." Julian straightened, clearly in his element. Vance Industries has divisions in 12 countries. We're primarily focused on sustainable technology, now moving away from the traditional manufacturing that grandfather started. Sustainable technology, Sarah repeated, impressed. That's important work. It's profitable work, Julian corrected, then caught himself. But yes, also important. You could do both, Amelia suggested from her corner where she was sketching. Make money and make a difference. Julian looked at his niece, and Eleanor could see the moment he realized that's what she was, his niece, his family, with something like surprise. That's what Mother always says. Because it's true, Eleanor said. Your grandfather never understood that. He thought business was war. But it doesn't have to be. Is that why you built the children's hospital? Sarah asked. The one in Brooklyn, I took my class there on a field trip once. The Eleanor Vance Children's Wing. Eleanor's breath caught. You were there in my wing. 5 years ago. The kids loved it. There's a music therapy room with all these instruments the patients can play. I funded that, Eleanor said softly. In memory of you. Of Lily. I thought if I couldn't save my own child, maybe I could save others. You did, Sarah said. One of my students, Marcus, he was treated there for leukemia. He's in high school now, wants to be a doctor. You saved him, Mom. Eleanor had to turn away, overwhelmed by the strange circularity of it. Her daughter, alive, had walked through halls built in memory of her death. As the evening wore on, Sarah grew weaker, her breathing becoming more labored. Patricia emerged from the kitchen to check her vitals, adjusting the morphine drip with practiced efficiency. She needs to rest, the nurse said gently but firmly. I want them to stay, Sarah protested weakly. All of them. They can stay, Patricia agreed. But you need to sleep. They arranged themselves around the room, Eleanor and Anthony on chairs, pulled close to the bed, Julian somewhat awkwardly on the couch, Amelia curled up in her painting corner. It was like a vigil, Eleanor thought, or maybe a celebration. Perhaps both. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring something that made Anthony reach for his guitar, or Eleanor squeeze her hand. Around midnight, she woke more fully, her eyes focusing on Julian. Tell me a secret, she said to him. Something nobody knows. Julian looked uncomfortable, but something in Sarah's face, perhaps the knowledge that secrets wouldn't matter soon, made him answer. I used to pretend I had a sister, he admitted quietly. When I was young, I'd set a place for her at my tea parties. Mother never knew. I called her Julie. Eleanor's heart broke a little. Her cold, calculating son had been a lonely child pretending to have a sibling. What was Julie like? Sarah asked. Kind, Julian said immediately. She laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. She wasn't afraid of Father the way I was. She was brave. That sounds wonderful, Sarah said. I'm sorry I couldn't be Julie for you then. You're here now, Julian said, and Eleanor heard something crack in his voice. That's what matters. Sarah smiled and drifted back to sleep. The room fell quiet except for her labored breathing and the soft hum of medical equipment. Eleanor found herself thinking about time, how they measure it in years, months, days. But really it came down to moments. This moment with her daughter alive and her family gathered was worth 50 years of waiting. Anthony started playing softly on his guitar, an old melody Eleanor recognized, the lullaby he'd written when she was pregnant, the one he'd never gotten to sing to their baby. But he was singing it now, 50 years late, but still perfect, and Sarah smiled in her sleep. What happens after? Amelia asked suddenly, her voice small in the darkness. When she's gone, what happens to us? It was the question none of them had wanted to ask. Would this strange, sudden family dissolve once Sarah was gone? Would they return to their separate lives, connected only by shared grief? "We stay family," Eleanor said firmly. "If you'll let us, you're our granddaughter Amelia. That doesn't end." "She's right," Julian said unexpectedly. "Family is permanent." "Even inconvenient family?" Amelia asked with a weak smile. "Especially inconvenient family," Julian replied. "They're usually the most interesting." Sarah stirred her eyes, opening halfway. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise me you'll take care of each other. All of you." They promised, a chorus of voices in the dark. Sarah nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes again. The night stretched on, marked by the changing of IV bags and the soft murmur of conversation. They told stories, Eleanor, about the time she'd snuck out to see Anthony play and gotten caught climbing back in her window. Anthony about the song he'd written after Lily was born, that he'd never played for anyone. Julian surprising them with a story about hiring a private investigator as a teenager to find out if he had any siblings. "What did they find?" Amelia asked. "Nothing," Julian said. "Because they were looking in the wrong places, looking for living children, not dead ones." "Not dead," Sarah corrected sleepily. "Just misplaced." As dawn approached, painting the sky outside in shades of pink and gold, Sarah's breathing changed, becoming shallower, more irregular. Patricia checked her quietly and caught Eleanor's eye, giving a small shake of her head. "It won't be long," she said softly. "Maybe you should say what you need to say." Eleanor moved closer to the bed, taking Sarah's hand in both of hers. "Lily, my sweet girl, I love you. I've loved you every day for 50 years, and I'll love you every day for whatever time I have left." "I love you too, Mom," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up." Anthony kissed her forehead, his tears falling onto her face. "You're my music, baby girl. You always have been." Julian stood awkwardly by the bed, clearly struggling with what to say. Finally, he leaned down and whispered something in Sarah's ear that made her smile. "I would have liked that too," she said softly. Amelia curled up next to her mother on the bed, careful of the tubes and wires. "I love you, Mom. You're the best mother anyone could ask for. And you're the best daughter," Sarah said, her voice barely audible now. "Take care of them for me. They need you." "I will," Amelia promised. Sarah's eyes moved to each of them in turn, Eleanor, Anthony, Julian, Amelia. Her family complete at last. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me this, for giving me all of you." She closed her eyes, a peaceful expression settling over her face. Her breathing slowed, became gentler, as if she was finally able to rest after a long journey. They stayed with her as the sun rose, fully filling the room with light. Sarah's breathing grew softer and softer, like a song fading out, until finally, gently, it stopped. "She's gone," Patricia said quietly, checking for a pulse. "I'm so sorry." But as Eleanor looked at her daughter's face, peaceful in death, in a way she hadn't been in life, she thought that sorry wasn't quite right. Grateful, maybe. Grateful for the days they'd had, for the truth finally revealed, for the family, drawn together by loss and love. "We found each other," Eleanor said softly, still holding Sarah's cooling hand. "After all this time, we found each other. That's what matters." Anthony began to play again, a melody that was both mourning and celebration, and Eleanor realized that this was what Sarah had given them, not just the knowledge of her existence, but each other. A family forged in the crucible of grief and limited time, but family nonetheless. Julian reached over and took Eleanor's free hand, squeezing it gently. "She was brave," he said. "Just like Julie would have been." Amelia was crying silently, her hand on her mother's cheek. "She waited," she said. "She waited until she knew we'd all be okay." And maybe that was true, Eleanor thought. Maybe Sarah had held on just long enough to weave them all together, to create something that would survive her passing. A legacy not of money or property, but of connection. Outside New York was waking up the sounds of traffic, and life filtering through the windows. But inside the small apartment, time had stopped holding them. In this moment, a family complete, even in loss, bound together by the woman who had brought them all home. "What now?" Anthony asked, his voice rough with tears. "Now we honor her," Eleanor said. "We live. We stay together. We make sure her life mattered." "It mattered," Amelia said firmly. "She mattered." And she had. Sarah Russo née Lily Vance had lived 50 years unknown to her birth parents, but she had lived well. She had loved and been loved. She had taught children and raised a daughter and made the world a little brighter for having been in it. That was worth more than all the money in Eleanor's empire. That was worth everything. As Patricia began the necessary procedures, the family, for that's what they were, now truly and completely stood together, supporting each other through the first moments of their new reality. They had lost Sarah, but they had found each other. It wasn't a fair trade, but it was what they had. And sometimes Eleanor thought, looking at her son holding his niece while she cried, her own hand still entwined with Anthony's. Sometimes what you have is enough. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. The sun climbed higher, flooding the room with golden light, and Eleanor could almost imagine Sarah's spirit in it, finally free from pain, finally at peace, finally home. The funeral arrangements became a battle of wills between Eleanor's desire for grandeur and Amelia's insistence on simplicity. They sat in Eleanor's penthouse 3 days after Sarah's passing, papers spread across the dining table like a corporate merger rather than a goodbye. "She would have hated this," Amelia said, pushing away the catalog from the city's most exclusive funeral home. Marble caskets and horse-drawn carriages, that wasn't who she was. "She was my daughter," Eleanor said stiffly, though her heart wasn't in the argument. "She deserves the best." "She deserves what she would have wanted," Anthony said gently from his place by the window. He'd barely left Eleanor's apartment since Sarah died, as if leaving would make it real. "Our Lily was never about showing off." "Sarah," Julian corrected automatically, then caught himself. "Sorry. I know you called her Lily, but she lived as Sarah." It was strange, Eleanor thought, how Julian had appointed himself the keeper of Sarah's memory, the protector of who she'd actually been versus who they'd imagined her to be. He'd thrown himself into funeral planning with the same intensity he brought to acquisitions, but with an unexpected tenderness. "Both," Amelia said quietly. "She was both. Lily to you, Sarah to me, but both were real." Eleanor's phone rang Margaret with updates about the burial plot. Eleanor had initially wanted to move Sarah to the family mausoleum, but Amelia had fought that too. "She should be buried next to Dad," Amelia had insisted. "They loved each other. They should be together." Now Eleanor listened to Margaret explain the logistics, while watching Amelia sketch absently on a notepad, her hands never still even in grief. The girl had her grandmother's nervous energy. Eleanor realized the need to be doing something, anything, rather than sitting with the pain. "There's been a development," Margaret said carefully. "The press has gotten wind of the story. Someone at the hospital talked. The headlines are, well, they're calling it the billionaire's lost daughter." Eleanor closed her eyes. Of course. Even in death there would be vultures. How bad? They have photos of you at the hospital. They know about the DNA test. They're digging into the adoption records, your father's involvement. Mrs. Vance, this is going to be big. Eleanor looked at Amelia, still sketching, unaware that her private grief was about to become public entertainment. Handle it, she told Margaret. Whatever it takes. Buy them off, threaten lawsuits. I don't care. Keep them away from the funeral. But it was too late. Within hours, reporters were camped outside Eleanor's building, outside Amelia's apartment, calling anyone who might have known Sarah. The story was irresistible billionaire heiress stolen, baby deathbed reunion. Every tabloid in the city wanted a piece of it. We could use this, Julian said, ever practical. Control the narrative. An exclusive with the Times, perhaps. It could be good for the company's image. Julian, Eleanor snapped, your sister is dead. She's not a PR opportunity. Everything is a PR opportunity, Julian said, then seemed to hear himself. Sorry. Force of habit. Amelia stood abruptly, her sketch pad falling to the floor. I need air. I'll come with you, Anthony offered, but she shook her head. I need to be alone, just for a bit. After she left, the three of them sat in uncomfortable silence. They were still learning how to be around each other, without Sarah as their center, like planets trying to orbit an extinct sun. She's struggling, Anthony observed unnecessarily. We all are, Eleanor replied. No, Julian said thoughtfully. She's struggling differently. We're mourning someone we just found. She's mourning someone she's had all her life. It's not the same. It was perhaps the most emotionally intelligent thing Eleanor had ever heard her son say. She studied him, this man she'd raised, but never really known, and wondered if Sarah's brief presence had changed him, or merely revealed what had always been there. The funeral was set for Saturday, a compromise between Eleanor's desire for St. Patrick's Cathedral and Amelia's preference for the small church Sarah had attended sporadically. They settled on a chapel in Brooklyn, beautiful but understated, with room for the crowds that would inevitably come. The night before the funeral, they gathered in Amelia's apartment to go through Sarah's things. It was meant to be practical, choosing jewelry for her to wear, photos for the memorial display. But it became something else. Look at this, Amelia said, pulling out a box from under Sarah's bed. Inside were hundreds of ticket stubs, movies, concerts, school plays. She kept everything, every memory. Anthony picked up a faded ticket. The Nutcracker 2005. My first dance recital, Amelia said, smiling through tears. I was a terrible mouse, forgot half the steps, but Mom cheered like I was prima ballerina at Lincoln Center. They found photo albums, letters, a journal Sarah had kept sporadically over the years. Eleanor opened it randomly and found an entry from 2010. Amelia asked about her grandparents today. I told her they were gone, which feels like a lie, but also like truth. How can I miss people I never knew, but I do? I dream sometimes about a woman with gray eyes like mine telling me she loves me. Silly dreams of a dying woman. Eleanor had to close the journal, unable to bear it. Sarah had dreamed of her. Somehow across all that distance and time they'd been connected. She knew, Eleanor whispered. Part of her knew. As they continued sorting, Julian surprised them all by pulling out his phone and showing them something he'd been working on, a video memorial, compiled from the photos and videos Amelia had shared. When did you do this? Eleanor asked, watching Sarah's life play across the screen. Baby photos, wedding pictures, Amelia's birth family vacations, right up to those last days in the hospital. I couldn't sleep, Julian admitted. It seemed better than staring at spreadsheets. The video was beautiful, professionally edited with music. Anthony's music, Eleanor realized recordings Julian had somehow obtained of the songs Anthony had written for their lost daughter. "It's perfect," Amelia said softly. "She would have loved it." That night, none of them wanted to be alone. They ended up in Eleanor's penthouse, an odd slumber party of grief. Amelia took one of the guest rooms, Anthony another, while Julian surprised everyone by choosing to sleep on the couch rather than go home. "I don't want to miss anything," he said when Eleanor questioned him. "We already missed so much." Eleanor couldn't sleep. She wandered her apartment, this space that had felt like home for 20 years, but now seemed foreign. She found herself in the room that would have been Lily's nursery, sitting in the rocking chair she'd never used. Anthony found her there at 3 in the morning. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I keep thinking she'll call," Eleanor admitted, "that this is all some terrible mistake and she'll call and say she's feeling better." Anthony entered the room, sitting on the floor beside the rocking chair. "Tell me about the years after they took her." So Eleanor did. She told him about the breakdown she'd had, spending 3 months in what her father called a rest facility, but was really a psychiatric hospital. About the marriage to Richard arranged while she was still too medicated to properly object. About Julian's birth, and how she'd held him and sobbed, terrified they'd take him too. "I wasn't a good mother to Julian," she admitted. "I was so afraid of loving him too much, of losing him, that I loved him too little. By the time I realized what I was doing, Richard had already shaped him in his image." "He's not as cold as he seems," Anthony said. "There's something underneath. Sarah saw it. Sarah saw the best in everyone." "She got that from you?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "From me, I see profit margins and market opportunities. You saw a waitress with a locket and risked everything to find the truth," Anthony countered. "You saw past 50 years of lies to find our daughter. That's not about profit margins." They sat in comfortable silence until dawn crept through the windows. Then Anthony asked the question Eleanor had been dreading. "What happens with us, Ellie? After tomorrow, after the funeral, what happens?" Eleanor didn't know how to answer. They weren't the 18-year-olds who'd fallen in love in a Greenwich Village club. They were strangers who shared a daughter, a granddaughter, and a grief that no one else could understand. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I can't lose you again. I've lost too much already." Anthony reached up and took her hand, his fingers still calloused from decades of guitar playing. "Then you won't. We'll figure it out. For Amelia, if nothing else." The funeral was a blur of faces and flowers. The press had been held back but not eliminated, their cameras capturing every moment for public consumption. Eleanor had always been comfortable in the public eye, but this felt invasive, violent almost. The chapel was packed, Sarah's fellow teachers, former students, neighbors from her building, and then the people who came because Eleanor Vance was there. The mixing of worlds was jarring, Sarah's humble life colliding with Eleanor's gilded one. Amelia spoke first, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "My mother was not a billionaire. She was not a lost heiress or a tabloid story. She was a teacher who stayed up all night making sure her students had supplies. She was a woman who sang off-key in the shower and burned toast every single morning. She was love incarnate, and she taught me that money meant nothing if you didn't have people to share it with." She looked directly at Eleanor as she said the last part, and Eleanor felt the words like a physical blow. Anthony played a song he'd written for Sarah in those final days, a melody that captured both sorrow and joy, loss and discovery. Several people were openly weeping by the time he finished. Julian spoke next, surprising everyone. "I knew my sister for exactly 1 week. he began, his voice carefully controlled. 1 week out of 48 years. It shouldn't have been enough time to matter. But Sarah had this way of making every moment count. She taught me something I'd forgotten, or maybe never knew, that family isn't about blood or money or inheritance. It's about showing up. She showed up for everyone in her life, even strangers who turned out to be family. Even a brother she'd never known she had. He paused, composing himself. I'm a businessman. I measure success in numbers and profits and losses. But Sarah's life can't be measured that way. Her success was in this room, in all the people she touched, the students she taught, the daughter she raised, the family she brought together, even as she was leaving us. That's a fortune no one can calculate. Eleanor stood last, looking out at the sea of faces. She'd prepared remarks, professional and polished, but standing there, they felt wrong. I buried my daughter 50 years ago, she said instead. An empty casket, an empty grave, an empty heart. I built an empire on that emptiness, thinking success could fill the void. It couldn't. Nothing could. Until 5 days ago, when I saw a locket I thought was buried and discovered my daughter had been alive all along. She had to stop, overwhelmed. The chapel was silent, except for muffled sobs. Sarah Russo lived a life I never could have given her. She knew struggle and triumph, love and loss, the value of $1 earned, and the worthlessness of $1 hoarded. She became the woman I always hoped my daughter would be: kind, generous, beloved. I missed 50 years of her life, but she gave me the greatest gift in her death. She gave me herself, our granddaughter, a son. I'm only now learning to know, and a love I thought was lost forever. She looked at the casket draped in simple white roses at Amelia's insistence. My father stole you from me, but he couldn't steal the love. It waited 50 years to find its way home. You brought it home, my darling girl. You brought us all home. After the service, the burial was private, just the 4 of them at the cemetery, where Tom Russo was buried. Sarah was laid to rest beside her husband, the 2 headstones matching in their simplicity. Eleanor had wanted to add Lily Vance to the stone, but Amelia had convinced her otherwise. She lived as Sarah Russo, Amelia had said. Let her rest as Sarah Russo. But Eleanor had added one thing, a small engraving at the bottom, finally found. The reception was at Eleanor's penthouse, an odd mixing of Sarah's world and Eleanor's. Teachers chatted with CEOs, Sarah's book club mingled with Eleanor's board members. It should have been awkward, but somehow it worked. Sarah would have loved it, Eleanor thought, this breaking down of barriers she'd never even known existed. Mrs. Vance, a young man approached, barely out of college. I'm Marcus Chen. Sarah was my 5th grade teacher. Eleanor remembered the boy with leukemia treated in her children's wing. She talked about you, Eleanor said. You want to be a doctor? Because of her, Marcus said. She visited me every day in the hospital, your hospital. She read to me, helped me keep up with schoolwork. She saved my life in more ways than the doctors did. After he walked away, Eleanor found herself crying again. These stories kept coming. Students Sarah had tutored for free, families she'd helped, lives she'd changed. Her daughter had been a force of good in the world, with or without the Vance fortune. As the reception wound down, Eleanor found herself on the terrace with Anthony, Julian, and Amelia, the 4 of them looking out at the city lights. She would have hated this apartment, Amelia said with a small smile. Too big, too fancy. She would have said it echo. It does echo, Eleanor admitted. I've just never noticed before. You could sell it, Julian suggested. Get something smaller. Eleanor looked at him in surprise. Julian never suggested selling assets. Or, Anthony said carefully, you could fill it. They all looked at him. Amelia shouldn't be alone in that apartment, he continued. And Eleanor shouldn't be alone here. We're family now, aren't we? Sarah made sure of that. You're suggesting we all live together? Julian asked, incredulous. I'm suggesting we don't waste any more time, Anthony said. We lost 50 years. Sarah had days. How much time do any of us really have? Amelia was the first to speak. Mom would have liked that. All of us together. She always wanted a big family. It's impractical, Julian said automatically, but Eleanor could see him considering it. Since when has our family been practical? Eleanor asked. We're a billionaire who found her dead daughter alive, a musician who never stopped loving his first love, a son who's learning to be a brother after his sister's death, and an artist who's lost everything but gained a family she never knew existed. Practical went out the window the moment I saw that locket. Over the next weeks, they found their rhythm. Amelia moved into Eleanor's penthouse, taking a suite of rooms that had never been used. Anthony took another suite, coming and going between New York and California as he wrapped up his life there. Even Julian started spending more time there, showing up for dinners that Amelia cooked. She'd inherited Sarah's love of feeding people. They were an odd family formed by loss but sustained by something else. Love, maybe, though it was complicated. Love tinged with grief and guilt and 50 years of absence. One evening, about a month after the funeral, Eleanor found Amelia in what had been the unused nursery, now transformed into an art studio. She was working on a massive canvas, a portrait that took Eleanor's breath away. It was Sarah, but not as she'd been in those final days. This was Sarah as she might have been if life had been different, healthy, vibrant, surrounded by the phantom images of the life she'd lived and the life she might have had. In the painting, Sarah wore the locket, but it was open, revealing not a message but a mirror, reflecting the viewer back to themselves. It's for the children's wing, Amelia explained. If you'll let me donate it. I want kids to see that even when someone's gone, what they gave us stays. Eleanor pulled her granddaughter into a fierce hug. She would be so proud of you. She was, Amelia said. Every day. That night at dinner, Anthony played guitar while Amelia painted, and Eleanor and Julian went over business proposals, but differently than before. Now they discussed how each deal would impact people, not just profits. Sarah's influence even in death. We're acquiring a pharmaceutical company, Julian said. They make cancer drugs. Make them affordable, Eleanor said immediately. No one should have to choose between treatment and bankruptcy. Julian looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. That will significantly impact the profit margins. Then it will impact the profit margins, Eleanor said firmly. Sarah had insurance and still struggled. Imagine those who don't. The board will resist, Julian warned. Then the board will be replaced, Eleanor said. I'm done prioritizing money over people. It was a radical shift for Vance Industries, but Eleanor didn't care. She'd spent 50 years building an empire on emptiness. Now she would rebuild it on something else, Sarah's values, the ones she'd developed without any influence from the Vance fortune. 6 months after Sarah's death, they held another gathering, this time intentional. They'd decided to create a scholarship fund in Sarah's name specifically for students who wanted to become teachers. The announcement was held at the school where Sarah had taught with her former students and colleagues in attendance. Marcus Chen spoke again now in his first year of pre-med. Mrs. Russo always said that education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. She gave us that inheritance every day, expecting nothing in return except that we pay it forward. This scholarship ensures her inheritance will continue forever. The fund was enormous. Eleanor had seeded it with $50 million, one for each year she'd been without Sarah. But more importantly, it would be administered by people who knew Sarah, who understood that she would have wanted the money to go to those who needed it most, not those with the best connections. After the announcement, Eleanor found herself in Sarah's old classroom. It had been preserved as it was, with her handwriting still on the board, her inspirational posters still on the walls. Amelia found her there, sitting in Sarah's chair. She loved this room, Amelia said it was where she did her most important work. She was right, Eleanor said. All my boardrooms and business deals, none of it mattered like this room mattered. That's not true, Amelia said gently. Your money is going to help thousands of kids. Sarah would have been amazed by that. But she didn't need it to be amazing herself. No, Amelia agreed. But she would have used it well, like we're doing now. And they were interrupted by Julian, uncharacteristically dressed down in jeans and a sweater, Anthony's influence probably. The lawyers are here, he said, for the final paperwork. Eleanor had made a decision that had shocked everyone, including herself. She was restructuring her entire estate. The bulk would still go to Julian, he was her son after all, but significant portions were now designated for Amelia and the foundation they'd created in Sarah's name. More surprisingly, she'd made Anthony and Julian co-executors, forcing them to work together. You sure about this? Julian asked, as they walked back to the main office. It's irreversible once you sign. I've never been more sure of anything, Eleanor said. Sarah brought us together. The money should keep us that way. As she signed the papers, Eleanor thought about her father, how horrified Charles Vance would be to see his carefully hoarded fortune being dispersed this way. But Charles had been wrong about everything that mattered. Money wasn't power, it was potential. And Sarah had shown them what that potential could become. The year anniversary of Sarah's death arrived with spring rain, the kind that made the city smell clean and new. They gathered at her grave, the four of them, plus a surprising addition, Marcus Chen, and 3 other former students who'd loved her. She always said April showers brought May flowers. One of the students said, leaving a bouquet of daisies on the grave. She'd like that it's raining. They didn't stay long. Sarah wouldn't have wanted them standing around being sad. Instead, they went to Amelia's old apartment, which she'd kept, unable to let it go completely. They cooked Sarah's famous lasagna using her mother's recipe, told stories, looked through photos. She brought us together, Anthony said, raising a glass of wine. To Sarah, who gave us each other. To Lily, Eleanor added, who was never really lost. To Mom, Amelia said, who taught us that love is the only thing worth keeping. To my sister, Julian said, last surprising them all with the emotion in his voice, who I knew for a week but will remember forever. They drank, and the rain stopped, and sun broke through the clouds, filling the small apartment with light. Eleanor looked around at these people, her family strange and complicated and perfect in its imperfection, and felt something she hadn't felt in 50 years. Complete. Sarah was gone, but what she'd given them remained. Not money or property or any of the things Eleanor had spent her life accumulating, but connection. The knowledge that they belonged to each other, that they were bound by more than blood or law or obligation. They were bound by love discovered too late, but not too late to matter.